Eddie is somewhere between stunned and not even fully surprised. He walks out of that cafe into the gray afternoon light of New York City, feeling like the last thread just snapped. That's when he runs into Vernon. Vernon is the brother of Eddie's ex-wife, someone who floated through the shadier edges of life for years, always looking like he knew something other people didn't. Vernon takes one look at Eddie and reads the situation immediately. He suggests they grab a drink. Eddie, having nothing else to do, agrees. They sit down, and Eddie admits the full picture. No writing, no relationship, no momentum, just a growing pile of failure with his name on it. Vernon listens, nods, and then reaches into his pocket. He slides a small white pill across the table and explains that he works in pharmaceutical development now. This particular compound, he says, is unlike anything that's ever existed. The human brain typically runs at around 30% of its actual capacity. This pill closes the gap, all of it. Eddie looks at the pill. He looks at Vernon. He says no. He doesn't have the money for it, and he's not sure he believes a word of what he's hearing. Vernon tells him this one's free and hands over a business card. Then he leaves. Eddie walks home holding that pill between two fingers, turning it over, studying it. He is a man who has absolutely nothing to lose, and he knows it. He swallows the pill. What happens next is difficult to describe in ordinary terms because it doesn't feel ordinary. It feels like a wall dissolving. Every conversation he's ever had, every book he's ever read, every film he's half watched, every word of a foreign language he absorbed, without realizing it, all of it starts organizing itself into usable, accessible, precise information. His brain doesn't speed up. It clarifies. The world comes into focus like a lens being turned for the first time. He runs into his landlord's wife in the hallway. She's coming to collect overdue rent, and she's furious. Eddie looks at her, and within seconds, reads everything. The tension in her jaw, the textbook in her bag, the specific kind of exhaustion that belongs to someone studying for something brutal, law school. He can see it. He asks her about it. She stares at him like he's broken into her private life. And then, instead of arguing about the rent, he sits down with her and in 45 minutes produces a set of legal notes so sharp and well organized that she leaves looking genuinely stunned. Eddie goes back upstairs and looks at his apartment, really looks at it. He starts cleaning, not out of guilt or obligation, but because his mind has decided that disorder is unacceptable and his body is following orders. He cleans the entire place from floor to ceiling and then, without pausing, sits down at his desk and starts writing. The words come out in long, clean rivers, coherent and alive, and finally worthy of the contract he signed. He writes until exhaustion takes him, and he falls asleep at his keyboard. Morning comes. The pill has worn off. He's back to being regular Eddie, which now feels like putting on wet clothes, but the pages are real. They exist. He takes them to his editor, and by the time he gets home, she's already called 3 times. She is astonished. She wants more. Eddie stands in his apartment, listening to her voicemail, and understands very clearly that the man who wrote those pages and the man listening to this message are not quite the same person. He needs another pill. He goes to find Vernon and immediately knows something is wrong. Vernon opens the door with a face that has been recently rearranged by someone's fists. He won't say who. He does confirm that NZT is not a legal substance, that it hasn't cleared any regulatory process, and that its production operates entirely outside the law. When Eddie admits he needs more, Vernon agrees to discuss terms, but first asks him to run a quick errand, pick up dry cleaning, grab breakfast, standard stuff. Eddie agrees and heads out. When he comes back, Vernon is dead. He's been killed with significant efficiency, and whoever did it was looking for something specific. The apartment has been methodically dismantled. Eddie's mind, still unenhanced but sharper from recent use, works through the logic immediately. The killer was searching for the pills. The question is whether they found them. He searches too, adding his own disorder to the existing chaos, until he finds what he's looking for inside the oven. A supply of NZT and a substantial amount of cash, both hidden where someone in a hurry wouldn't think to look. He pockets everything and opens the door to let the police in. At the station, Eddie gives them almost nothing useful. He presents the encounter with Vernon as coincidental. He doesn't mention the pills. They take his number and release him, and he walks back out into the city carrying a secret that someone just killed for. Back home, he takes a pill. His mind lifts like a curtain rising on a stage, and now he has a supply, Vernon's cash, and a book to finish. He writes the entire manuscript in 4 days, 1 pill per day. He delivers the work and steps back to assess what he has become. It turns out, what he has become is extraordinary. He picks up languages the way other people pick up accents, absorbing grammar and vocabulary and idiom from recordings and conversations at a speed that doesn't feel human. He sits down at a piano and plays. He studies poker theory and wins. He reads medical literature and retains it completely. He walks into social situations that would have previously terrified him, and commands the room without effort. The fear and hesitation that defined his old self have simply vacated the premises. But the money situation requires attention. Vernon's cash will only go so far. Eddie has been reading about financial markets with the kind of depth and speed that makes the material rearrange itself into patterns most professional traders spend careers trying to see. He starts with a small investment, $800, and in 2 days turns it into $7,000. It's genuinely remarkable, but it's also too slow. He needs capital, and the banks won't touch him. His credit history reads like a cautionary tale, so he makes a different kind of call. He reaches out to a Russian moneylender named Gennady, a man who operates in the part of the economy that doesn't file taxes. Gennady agrees to lend him $100,000 at terms that are, to put it generously, aggressive. Eddie takes the money. Through a new contact named Kevin, Eddie lands a position at a trading firm where he can work with real volume. Under the influence of NZT, he functions like a system that processes market data faster than it can be generated. Every variable gets weighted, every trend gets extrapolated, every risk gets calculated to a resolution that shouldn't be possible for a single human brain operating in real time. By the end of the week, his brokerage account contains more than $2 million. The number doesn't feel real. The trajectory feels inevitable. Word travels in financial circles the way it always does, quickly and with embellishment. A message comes through Kevin that Carl Van Loon wants a meeting. Van Loon is not a name that appears on lists of up-and-coming players. He's the kind of name that other powerful names defer to in quiet rooms. The success also reopens a personal door. Lindy agrees to dinner with him. He shows up transformed, confident, genuinely engaging, switching effortlessly into Italian when the moment calls for it, reading her emotional state with an accuracy that she finds unsettling and magnetic at the same time. They reconnect. The relationship restarts. Eddie is winning on every front simultaneously, which should perhaps be the first warning sign that something is being deferred rather than solved. Two things begin to intrude on the momentum. The first is a man he keeps seeing in his peripheral vision. Different locations, always the same face, always watching. The second is stranger and harder to explain. He starts experiencing gaps, moments where time seems to skip forward, where he finds himself somewhere with no clear memory of how he arrived. The pills work, but they're starting to show edges that weren't visible before. He arrives at the Van Loon meeting composed and precise. Van Loon is the kind of man who has spent decades learning how to evaluate people, and he evaluates Eddie throughout the entire conversation without revealing a single conclusion. Eddie senses the scrutiny and matches it. In the car afterward, Van Loon shows him a list of companies. Eddie processes it in minutes and works out that Van Loon is orchestrating a massive merger with the business operations of a man named Hank Atwood. Van Loon barely conceals his surprise at how fast Eddie gets there. When Eddie identifies a structural risk in the deal that the entire advisory team missed, Van Loon schedules a follow-up immediately. Energized, Eddie decides to take a walk and process everything. He doesn't fully process what happens over the next 18 hours. He comes back to awareness at a subway station mid-fight with 4 men, holding his own with techniques he absorbed from films and demonstrations he watched years ago and never consciously retained. Another gap. He's at a bar outside the city. Another gap. A hotel room with a woman he has no memory of meeting. And then the pill wears off, and he's sitting in a strange room with an injured leg and 18 missing hours and no idea what happened in between. In the morning, the news reports the discovery of a body. The name is Maria Winter. The description of the circumstances, a hotel, the approximate time of death, lands in Eddie's chest, like something physical. Witnesses reported an unidentified man seen near her that evening. He does the math, and the answer makes him want to be sick. He leaves the meeting with Van Loon in the middle of it and goes home. Melissa calls. She was also one of Vernon's clients. Once, she agrees to meet. Eddie finds someone who looks like they've been fighting a long war. The version of Melissa that once made rooms stop and look has been quietly dismantled by something that also used to make her feel invincible. She tells him the drug's ceiling is lower than it appears. No brain is engineered to sustain that level of activation indefinitely. People in Vernon's network have been dying from it. She stopped taking it, and now she lives with the withdrawal, headaches, an inability to concentrate, a constant gray fog that used to be a sharp and functional mind. She tells him to step down gradually. Reduce the dose. Stop before the damage becomes permanent. Eddie leaves that meeting already aware of something he should have noticed sooner. Gennady hasn't forgotten the loan. He shows up to remind Eddie in the specific way that people like Gennady remind people of things. Eddie has been too occupied to account for the interest accumulating on that original 100,000, and the oversight is now becoming a physical threat. He adds Gennady to the list of problems that require management and makes a mental note not to let that list get any longer. He goes to Lindy at her workplace and tells her the truth, all of it. She absorbs it with the composure of someone deciding in real time whether to be furious or frightened. She understands now where the new Eddie came from. He tells her there's a stash of pills at her apartment and he needs one of them immediately. She goes to get it. Before she can bring it back, she calls him in a panic. The man who has been following Eddie has tracked her down, and he's pursuing her through the city right now. Eddie talks her through it as he moves toward her location. The man following her is not a casual observer. He kills 2 people who try to intervene with complete indifference. The brutality of it creates the momentary distraction Lindy needs to disappear into the crowd near a skating rink. She finds herself holding the pill Eddie needed, and she makes a decision. She takes it. What follows is something Lindy will never fully be able to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. Her perception reorganizes itself in seconds. The environment around her transforms from a chaotic threat into a system she can read and navigate. She moves through the scenario with a precision that has nothing to do with training and everything to do with a brain suddenly operating at a capacity it was never supposed to reach. She picks up a length of metal and uses it with an accuracy that surprises even her, wounds the pursuer badly enough to end the chase, and walks away from the situation intact. When she reaches Eddie and hands him the pill, she looks at him differently than she has before, not with suspicion or judgment, with understanding. She knows now what it feels like, and that terrifies her in a way that isn't entirely negative. They find a hotel room and spend the night there. In the morning, she tells him she finally gets it. She understands why he can't simply stop. He promises her that once he's built enough of a foundation, once they're genuinely secure, he'll find a way off. He means it when he says it. But meaning it and managing it are 2 different problems. Gennady resurfaces with dramatically elevated demands. Eddie gives him a small supply of pills to buy time, watching the Russian's eyes when the pill takes effect and understanding that he has just created a new category of complication. He hires bodyguards and instructs them to maintain distance and avoid drawing attention. He adjusts his wardrobe planning so the pills can be concealed in custom pockets. He is juggling a growing number of variables that all require constant management, and the management itself requires the drug, and the drug has a supply problem, and the supply problem has a human cost he's been trying not to look at directly. 2 months into his partnership with Van Loon, Eddie has become the pivotal figure in what is shaping up to be the largest corporate merger deal in recent history. He is the person in the room who sees what no one else can see, calculates what no one else can calculate, and consistently arrives at conclusions that make everyone around him look 2 steps behind. Van Loon has gone from being curious about Eddie to being dependent on him, which is a transition that Van Loon himself hasn't fully acknowledged yet. Eddie, understanding that his pill supply has a finite horizon, has been quietly investing in a solution. He approaches a chemist with the kind of knowledge required to synthesize NZT and offers him $2 million to produce a private batch. The chemist agrees. The arrangement is managed carefully. Hidden pockets in every suit he owns. A supply chain that exists entirely outside any system that could be monitored. He is building redundancy into every part of his operation because he has begun to see clearly how precarious the whole structure actually is. Then the Maria Winter investigation catches up to him. A witness has come forward, placing him near her on the night of her death. Eddie immediately retains the best criminal defense attorney in New York, a man named Morris Brandt, who begins working through the evidentiary situation. The forensic picture is better than Eddie feared. Whatever happened in that hotel room, it left very little behind. The witness testimony is the primary threat. Brandt works the identification procedure with the kind of care that expensive lawyers apply to high-stakes problems. The witness stands behind a line of people who resemble Eddie closely enough to create genuine uncertainty. The identification fails. The case loses its momentum. Eddie walks. He collects his jacket from Morris and goes to meet Van Loon, who shares news that Hank Atwood has collapsed and is in a coma. The information lands strangely. Eddie remembers a moment from a recent meeting. Atwood's driver, a face he recognized, the man who followed him. The man who was following Lindy. Atwood was taking NZT too, which means somebody in Atwood's orbit had access to the pills. which means the driver is connected to that supply, which means the situation is more tangled than Eddie calculated. He steps away to check his personal stash and finds it empty. He left Van Loon's office carrying nothing. He opens a package delivered to him at Van Loon's building and finds a message from Gennady. The message takes the form of severed human hands, his bodyguards. The escalation is unambiguous. He gets home and turns on the news and sees Morris Brandt standing next to Atwood's wife in a clip about the hospital. The pieces connect with a click he can feel. Morris has the pills. Morris took the stash. His own lawyer robbed him while his bodyguards were being killed. He barely has time to absorb this before Gennady is at his door. The Russian's voice on the other side of the door carries the specific weight of someone who has already decided how this conversation is going to end. Eddie has no pills, no leverage, and no functioning exit. He looks around his apartment and makes a calculation. He is going to die in here unless he changes the variable. He moves through his things with increasing desperation, searching for the last pill he believes he hid somewhere weeks ago. Gennady's people are working through the door. He finds the pill in a coat pocket. He trips. The pill goes down. Gennady's men are inside the apartment. Gennady takes him, and it becomes clear that the Russian has been dosing himself from the pills Eddie provided. The drug enters his bloodstream differently now, faster and with longer duration, and Gennady has adapted his use accordingly. He tells Eddie that he'll find out whatever he needs to know, one way or another. His men start working through the apartment, and in Gennady's absolute confidence, he makes the mistake of getting too close. Eddie has been holding a knife behind his back since before the door came open. He uses it. Gennady goes down dying. And then Eddie does something that is either the most desperate or the most logical thing in the film. He presses himself against the floor and drinks the NZT from Gennady's blood. The effect is immediate and total. His mind comes back online at full capacity, and with it comes a clarity about exactly what needs to happen next. He processes the positions of everyone in the apartment, calculates the sequence, and moves through Gennady's remaining men with the kind of precision that only works when every decision is already made before the situation demands it. He walks out of his own apartment as the sole person standing. Atwood dies that night. Eddie makes a quiet call to one of Atwood's associates, mentioning that the medication that might have helped Atwood was apparently being held by Morris Brandt for personal use. The implication is left to do its own work. Morris, somewhere across the city, is about to have a very serious conversation with someone who cared deeply about Hank Atwood. Eddie, meanwhile, finally reaches the pharmaceutical supply he's been fighting for. 1 year later, Eddie Mora is running for Senate. His campaign is organized, articulate, and building momentum that feels inevitable to everyone watching it. He is being told that a major donor wants a meeting, and the name attached to the donor is Van Loon. Carl arrives and sits across from the man he thought he understood and finds someone he doesn't entirely recognize. He lays out what he knows. He discovered the lab producing Eddie's NZT supply, purchased the company, and shut it down. He is now, he explains, the only person capable of restarting production. The terms are simple. When Eddie reaches the presidency, which Van Loon has assessed as a realistic trajectory, he will serve certain interests, a specific circle of people. A very profitable arrangement for everyone involved. Eddie listens to the entire proposal without changing his expression, and then he explains calmly that he saw this exact scenario coming. He had been expecting it long enough to build a response. Multiple independent labs, running simultaneously, each isolated from the others, producing supply that Van Loon has no knowledge of and no access to. Moreover, Eddie spent the better part of the past year compiling information about Van Loon himself, the kind of information that has been organized and positioned in ways that become active if anything happens to Eddie or his operations. He is not Van Loon's asset. He never was. To demonstrate the point, he predicts a minor accident on the street below with the precision of someone reading a script. Then he looks at Van Loon directly and mentions, in the tone of clinical observation, that the rhythm of Carl's heartbeat suggests his cardiac function is operating well below normal capacity. He names the procedure Van Loon will need. He names the timeline. Van Loon cannot find the angle to push back. There is no angle. Eddie has already stood in every corner of this conversation and chosen this one deliberately. Carl Van Loon leaves without what he came for. Eddie orders lunch and sits with the quiet satisfaction of someone who built the long game while everyone else was playing the short one. Lindy is no longer surprised by him. She has learned, slowly, to exist beside someone who is becoming something genuinely new. Whether the drug made him or revealed him is a question Eddie stopped asking some time ago. The version of himself sitting in that chair didn't need the answer. He had the future to be getting on with, and for the first time in his life, he was completely ready for it.